Hey folks, Professor Diffley. This is History 100, Module 11. For this module, we'll do parts of 10 and 11. Selected topics. Looking at this, I realized I forgot to give the page number specifically. I'll update that later on Blackboard. But for now, just go by the lecture slides. You'll see the topics that are in there. As always, there's required videos. Some of these are shorter. Make sure you watch these, especially the ones about, well, all of them, but these cathedrals, universities, all that, and chivalry. I'm going to go with the videos more than anything for those. Obviously the textbook, but rather than me giving a talk on it. Crusades as well. You can see all of that there. So let me go back. There's also a discussion board this week for this module. And the discussion board is here. Knights, Crusades, and Romantic Notions of the Past. You can see the prompt here. Everything's due by the end of Sunday, the end of the week. So let's get into this. Let's get into the slideshow. As always, there's notes and everything. I listed the topics here at the beginning, so you can use those there as a guide. All right, so let's get into this. So the Commercial Revolution and the Crusades is where we're going to start here. The Commercial Revolution. So again, we're in the Middle Ages, but now you begin to get the economy changing. So going a little bit less out of the feudalism into more of a commercial system. The Europe is becoming more interconnected here. What are the causes of this? Oops, sorry there. The causes of this. So the causes are increased population and better technologies of getting around. You get better four-wheel carriages, getting better roads and bridges, so it's easier for people to trade. And now that there's more people, there's more stuff to trade. People need more goods, that sort of thing. And so what you get are these new commercial centers, three big ones: markets, fairs, and permanent centers. Markets became, at first, like weekly meetups. Like think of a farmer's market would be a modern concept, a modern equivalent of this, where once a week people would gather and sell their wares, sell their goods, that sort of thing. Usually in the same spot, and that's the way farmers markets usually are today. But this is where everybody, so market day would be when everybody would go. Fairs were a little different. Fairs were usually, sometimes once a year, they were occasionally, but they would focus on certain goods. So you had like book fairs, things like that. People would meet up, and it would be in an event. A modern equivalent of this, and one from the local area, would be the Big E each year. That's a fair in many ways. Think of a state fair, and really, the Big E is just a multiple state fair, that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of things. You've been to the Big E. You'll kind of get this where they're selling everything. Each of the states kind of sell their big products, that sort of thing. And then permanent centers. Permanent centers really grow out of the markets where there becomes a need for these all the time. And so you'll have them usually in certain areas. They grow up outside of castles, certain towns and cities. And so these are permanent centers. A modern equivalent of this would be, I guess, a shopping center in many ways, right? So it's always there. Where you can go. At one point it was malls, now it's strip malls and shopping centers, that sort of thing would be the modern equivalents of this. And so now, and this is a depiction one here, this is, this could be either a market day or a fair in some ways. And the other thing, now people start selling, trading, not just bartering, right? Bartering is trading one good for another. Here you're starting to get currency. And so increasingly you need bankers to house the money, to give out loans, and as money changers, right, of a change in currency from one to the other. And that is common. One of the things you start to get, though, is more and more stigmatizing of Jewish folk, especially for being in banking. In lots of places in Europe, you had laws against usury. Usury is where you loan out money and you charge interest rate. For Christians, you couldn't charge another Christian in interest when you loan them money. And so, and in many places, Jews had also been banned from a lot of other industries, not allowed to own land, so they became shopkeepers and bankers. And so over time, this is becomes a stereotype, an unwarranted stereotype, but a stigmatizing thing for them. But increasingly, money is becoming more important. People don't want just goods anymore, trading one like crop for another. Now the money can buy these things that we need and gives you more freedom to do this. Some more just depictions of this. This would be a medieval fair of them setting up there. This another depiction of it here that we already saw that. That's a bigger version of it. Here would be another one. This could be a market or a fair. This is a medieval, recreates a medieval one. And so they would have looked a lot like this with the tents and that in these different areas. And you can start to see these trade routes, more and more trade routes in the medieval ages here. The green being land routes. And blue, obviously, sea routes. And so you can see there's becoming more and more interconnectedness, more and more trade and long-distance trade, so people moving goods from one area to another. Here's just another picture of it there. And so, as a result of this, what you started to get were towns and cities began to grow bigger and bigger. And they were unplanned because they were haphazard and rapid growth. What does that mean? People, would usually start building houses around where a market or a fair was, and that would be there all the time. And so there's no, what do we call them, building codes, zoning laws, things like that. And so people would just build wherever they could. And you can see in this picture, they're just building on whatever plots they have there. However, over time, you would get like areas where you would have all the shops, and then there would be other areas where there's just houses. But this became very typical here. The typical housing will come out to layout and appearance a little bit more. Layout here, especially when people are running shops. These became two-story buildings because on the bottom would be the shop and above would be where the shopkeeper and the family lives. You still see that around today, but that would be common. But these would be their types of houses. So it's business and home all in one. Typical town layout and appearance. Again, it'd be windy roads, very narrow. This gives you this richer, bigger town, almost a city here, where you have a castle and cathedral in the middle. You could see here, you'd have different areas. Over here, you'd have blacksmiths and bakers and markets over here. So they would be in one area. You'd have a dock area over there. You can see there's even thieves. There's beggars, all of that. Thatchers, that's what the roofs are made out of, thatch. And so this is a sort of typical organization. This one seems a little bit more planned than others that we would see. But you can see here, as these towns grow, they keep having to expand the walls here. This is the walls of Pizenzia. And again, you see textile makers and smiths will be in one area, leather workers, tanners, as they're known, in other areas, churches and monasteries over here. But again, increasingly, you have to make the walls larger and larger as the towns grow. And so that's the rapid growth. And you can see how many times, right? So they didn't have to, so this is late antique wall, hypothetically. And then here's the wall in 872. But you can see here, in less than 100 years, they've had to expand the walls of the town again, just showing the rapid growth. So increasingly, as you have these merchants and more craftsmen, you get merchants and crafts guilds. More merchant guilds were more united in what they were going to charge. You would have merchant guilds that would span different areas, and so they would set prices. They'd work together and bind together. So those were a little less. But more common were trade guilds that you would have. These did lots of things, guilds. In some ways, they were charitable organizations. In some ways, they were sort of a club for people in the same trade. And what they did was they controlled prices, controlled quality, controlled training, who could get into the industry, and the trade more and more. We still use these, plumbers, electricians, and others still use these terms today for these guilds. They're often called unions today, but these are a little different because these trade guilds, people usually own their own shop. But this was a system you would have to go up in over time. And so it goes from the bottom here up top, apprentice, where you would start as a youngster. You wouldn't get paid. You would get housing and food, so room and board, but you'd be also learning a skill. Over time, then you could become a journeyman, and you could work for someone else, and you would make more money that way. But this meant that you had been working for a long time. And then you had the top of the guild is the master of the guild. Now, the thing is, how do you become a master? Well, you worked your way up, and you literally created a masterpiece. So say we're cabinet makers. You, as a journeyman, you would have to make your own cabinets, and other masters would determine whether or not it was worthy. And if they deemed it a masterpiece, you then got to move up to the role, the tier of master. Masters were allowed to then open their own shops. Now, one of the things about this, though, is it became harder and harder over time for journeymen to get up to the role of master, because every time there's a new master created, it was creating more competition, right? So you get to open your own shop. And so masters often or could band together to deny people, right? So just nothing would ever be good enough to get there. Interestingly, you're part of a guild right now. The education system, the higher ed system, is based off of the guild structure, right? I mean, as an apprentice, that's when you're starting out as a student, and then you get your bachelor's degree. That would make you a journeyman. And then what would make you a master? You guessed it right, master's degree or above. And the way that works is, again, especially, we sign off, teachers, professors sign off on the bachelor's degree, you've met all the qualifications, all of that, and you get to move up. When you get to a master's degree, it's very similar to a guild thing, where you have to either create a thesis or some other project, and then you have your exams, and the exams are done. Then you have to go defend your exams in front of a panel of people who've already reached this level. And so this colleges still follow this guild. And like I said, tattoo artists, the trades, the craftsmen today still use this as well. Again, the guilds do all sorts of things. Like I said, they control prices, control quality, control wages, who can get in. They help out in the community, that sort of thing. So these were very, very important, and really ran the trades and the crafts, and even selling goods that way. And the other thing is you start to get proto-capitalism, early capitalism here. These were new business arrangements that could make it easier to bear risk and spread risk around. Bring in more money, raise more capital for the needs there. What you got were partnerships. These still exist today. Partnerships are where people band together to create a partnership. Thing with partnerships is you also bear the burdens of any losses and risk in that. But these are very easy to do. Most people go this way. I would recommend not doing it. Make a corporation, but that's something for a different day. Mostly because you protect yourself from risk better through a corporate structure. But partnerships become that way, used that way. You start to get family corporations, what today Massachusetts called closely held businesses. Family corporations or family businesses are exactly what they sound like. Especially saw this in the the merchant guilds, where families would be a house of and they would have people scattered around in all the different areas they trade. And why do a family corporation? You have more control of it. The idea is it's maybe easier to work with families, that sort of thing. You also had contracts here, right? Writing down contracts. And this was interesting because there was this ban on usury. The way they would, they got really skilled at writing contracts so that they were charging interest, but it just didn't look like interest. You didn't call it that. It would be a balloon payment or something like that. And so they're trying to find ways around this. And increasingly, you have industry, light industry here. Well, it's not mass production like we have today. They're not massive factories, but you start to get this light industry where they were producing for the time large amounts of goods. You especially saw this in cloth and the textiles. You would do this using water mills, right? So the water power, to a degree, very rudimentary, or maybe animal power, where you hook them up, and you've probably seen this at a mill, and they walk around in a circle that way. But these are the beginnings of all that there. The other thing you start to get are these communes, these self-governing town. And so the interesting thing here is, where do these people fit in the medieval society and the hierarchy? It's tough because they don't have lords. They are free people in that. And so why would they be getting these grants of privilege? They would have tax breaks. They wouldn't need a lord. Kings would give it to them because these towns were important, right? They provided certain services, markets, things like that. And so to keep them happy and keep them on the state side, they would give them these things. The other thing about these, they are self-governing, right? So they become incorporated towns, and you've probably heard that. They set up their own governments and run that way. And so these are early forms of that. Where would you get these most? Italy, France, and Flanders, north of France, part of France. Why in Italy and some of these places? You had already more urban areas because of the Roman Empire, and from that. So these cities were more common there. They will increasingly spread throughout Europe, but that's where you have them at this point. All right, we will pick up from here on the next video.